They thought I was frail, a sentimental obstacle to their financial ambitions. My sons saw my home as mere property, my memories as clutter to be liquidated. They underestimated the quiet strength forged over decades, the kind that blossoms when pushed to the brink. They were about to learn that some things are worth far more than money. The Sunday afternoon sun, a guest that usually filled my living room with a gentle warmth, felt harsh and interrogating today. It slanted through the bay window, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the suffocatingly tense air between my two sons, Samuel and Jacob. I clutched my gardening magazine, its glossy pages a fortress of paper I was hiding behind. From my beloved armchair, the one Richard and I picked out together decades ago, I pretended to be absorbed in an article about pruning roses, while the sound of my own life being dismantled filled the room. They were talking about my house, my home, but the words they used were alien and brutal. "The market's at its absolute peak, Jake," Samuel insisted, his voice carrying the same aggressive, dismissive certainty he used to steamroll clients in his real estate developments. At 48, he was a man carved from raw ambition and impatience. "We sell now, we maximize the asset. It's a complete no-brainer." Jacob, my younger son, a financial advisor at 45, shifted his weight on the ottoman where he used to sit as a boy, listening to his father's stories. "But the rental yield in this neighborhood is incredibly solid. Sam, think of it as a long-term income stream, less exposure to market volatility. We could leverage it." They volleyed cold, sharp-edged terms: capital gains, escrow, depreciation, and fair market value, back and forth over my head. It was as if I were a ghost, already departed, my lingering presence a sentimental inconvenience to their financial strategy session. On the mantelpiece, a silver-framed photo of them as gap-toothed boys in matching sweaters seemed to mock the two callous strangers before me. They weren't discussing my future. They were liquidating my past, calculating the monetary worth of the walls that had absorbed 40 years of laughter, tears, and love. This wasn't a discussion. It was a dissection, and I was the one on the table, still breathing. This wasn't a new conversation, merely a more urgent, more predatory version of one that had been unfolding for the last 5 years. It began subtly, a creeping chill in the air after I lost Richard. While he was alive, he was the sturdy oak that buffered my son's ambitions. He'd laugh off Samuel's talk of market timing with a firm, "This is our home, son, not a stock certificate," and his word was law. But with the oak gone, the saplings were free to grow wild and crooked. Our Sunday family dinners, once a cherished ritual filled with laughter, had slowly morphed into informal asset review meetings, with me as the silent chairperson of a company being liquidated. Samuel, my firstborn, saw this house not as his childhood home, but as the most significant item in his inheritance portfolio. I remember about a year after Richard passed, Samuel brought a friend over for coffee. The man, all slicked-back hair and a too-wide smile, barely looked at me, but his eyes roamed every corner of the room, lingering on the archways and the original hardwood floors. He asked pointed questions about the foundation and local zoning laws. It wasn't a social call. It was a scouting mission, and I felt like a museum piece in my own exhibit. Jacob was softer, but his weakness was a different kind of poison. He was easily swayed by his older brother's domineering personality, a dynamic set in their childhood sandpit that had hardened into adult reality. His acquiescence was a quiet, constant betrayal. The worst part was watching him with Sarah, his wife, the only light in this encroaching darkness. She was the sole member of this family who still saw me, Diana, not the aging woman sitting on a valuable piece of real estate. Sarah was the one who would arrive early on Sundays, not to talk numbers, but to bring me a new variety of tea she'd found. It was Sarah who noticed the draft from the old window in the study and quietly arranged for a handyman to fix it, paying from her own pocket. It was Sarah who digitized all of Richard's old home videos onto a tablet for me, so I could watch them whenever I felt lonely. These weren't grand gestures, but small, steady stitches of love that held the fraying fabric of my life together. But to my sons, her kindness was a nuisance. They formed a united front against her, a casual, cruel dismissal meant to keep her in her place as an outsider. I will never forget my last birthday. Sarah had spent all afternoon baking a lemon and lavender cake, my favorite. When she presented it, Samuel had waved it away with a flick of his wrist. "Too much sugar, Sarah. Mom needs to watch her health." Jacob had mumbled his agreement, his eyes avoiding his wife's crestfallen face. The cake sat on the counter, a monument to her wasted effort. Jacob chose the path of least resistance, which always meant siding with his brother over his own wife, and in doing so, siding against the only person who showed me true affection. Each dismissal of Sarah was a dismissal of me, a confirmation that in their world, genuine care had no line on the balance sheet. The argument escalated, and the thin veneer of familial concern cracked and then shattered, revealing the raw, ugly avarice beneath. To break Jacob's wavering resolve, Samuel reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a glossy, professionally bound document. He didn't hand it over. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud that echoed the sound of a judge's gavel. "I took the liberty of having a full appraisal done last Tuesday," Samuel announced, his tone dripping with a smug finality that made my skin crawl. He had been here last Tuesday for a brief, stilted visit where he'd barely met my eye. Now I knew why. "And I've got a preliminary offer. A developer I know is willing to go 10% over asking. Cash close in 30 days. No contingencies." My breath caught in my throat. He hadn't asked. He hadn't consulted me. He had brought strangers to walk through my rooms, to measure my walls, to put a price tag on my life's work, all behind my back. Jacob, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and greed, picked up the report. I watched his face as he flipped through the pages. I saw the internal battle, his innate caution warring with the dazzling number Samuel had dangled before him. But it was a short-lived fight. I saw the exact moment he capitulated, the instant the sheer size of the figure on the page extinguished the last flicker of his conscience. That wasn't the worst of it. As Jacob angled the report, a page came into my view, its bold heading a punch to the gut. "Recommendations for depersonalization and staging." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a cold, itemized list for the systematic erasure of me. "Dispose of heavy, dated furniture, e.g., mahogany buffet, grandfather clock." My father's clock. "Neutralize personal effects, e.g., extensive family photo displays, book collections." Richard's library, his life's passion. The final, killing blow was a line about the garden, my sanctuary, the living tapestry Richard and I had woven together over 4 decades. "Recommend removal of overgrown, rose bushes, and extensive perennial beds to create a low-maintenance, modern landscape appealing to a younger demographic." They wanted to bulldoze my memories to appeal to a younger demographic. "Think about it, Jake," Samuel pressed, leaning in like a shark sensing blood. "We sell, we split it, and we can get Mom set up in a nice, manageable 1-bedroom at the Willows. No more stairs, no more worrying about upkeep." Jacob, now fully converted, nodded enthusiastically, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "He's right. The brochure for the Willows looked great. They have a meal plan. We could cover the first year's rent for her easily with a fraction of the proceeds." They started calculating it right there, scribbling on the back of an envelope from Samuel's pocket. They were no longer my sons. They were my disposers, my handlers, arranging the logistics of my displacement as if I were a piece of troublesome luggage. That was the last straw, the final, brittle thread of hope that they still saw their mother, and not an obstacle, snapped with an almost audible crack. In their minds, I had already been evicted. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. The familiar creaks and groans of the house, sounds that had soothed me for 40 years, now sounded like sighs of mourning. But as the hours ticked by, the profound, heart-shattering grief began to recede, replaced by something else. A cold, clear, and unfamiliar resolve. The illusion of my son's love, an illusion I had so desperately clung to, had been burned away. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't looking at the situation through the fog of a grieving widow or a doting mother. I was seeing it with the sharp, painful clarity of a woman betrayed. I was done being a victim in my own home. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn touched the dew on my rose bushes, I made a phone call. Not to my sons, but to Arthur Hamilton, my late husband's oldest friend and our lifelong family lawyer. His voice, a comforting baritone I've known since my wedding day, was laced with concern when I told him I needed to see him urgently. Sitting in his quiet, book-lined office that afternoon felt like taking my first breath of clean air after years in a smoke-filled room. I laid out the entire story, the Sunday meetings, the casual cruelty towards Sarah, and finally, the glossy appraisal report. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression shifting from sympathy to a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. When I finished, he leaned forward, his hands clasped on his mahogany desk. "Diana," he said, his voice firm and reassuring, "let me be perfectly clear. Richard left this house to you and you alone. Your name is the only one on the deed. You have 100% indisputable ownership. Your sons have no legal claim to it whatsoever until you are gone. What you do with it is entirely, and I mean entirely, up to you." The words were like a key, turning in a lock. I didn't know I was trapped behind. Legal confirmation of a power I had forgotten I possessed. We spent the next hour exploring options. Arthur laid them out with precision, but my mind had already found its path. A plan began to form, not one of anger or revenge, but of justice. It was a plan to protect the soul of my home and to reward the only person who understood its true worth. With Arthur's guidance, I made my decision. He drafted the document, a deed of gift. It was a simple, elegant, and irrevocable legal instrument. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no tearful arguments. My move would be silent, swift, and absolute. The following Tuesday, I returned to Arthur's office and with a steady hand, signed the papers. The house, my home, every brick, every floorboard, every memory held within its walls, was legally and immediately transferred to Sarah Ann Miller, my daughter-in-law. The final documents were notarized, filed with the county clerk, and the quiet revolution was complete. The following Sunday arrived, carrying with it the heavy sense of an impending storm. I spent the morning in my garden, my hands in the soil, drawing strength from the earth. I felt a strange and profound calm. The decision was made, the deed was done. All that remained was the final act. Samuel and Jacob arrived precisely at 2:00, a united front of purpose. They walked in not like sons visiting their mother, but like executives arriving for a hostile takeover. They carried with them an air of finality, their faces set with the grim determination of men who had come to issue an ultimatum. I was ready for them. I had set out a tray with my best china, pouring them tea as if it were any other Sunday. The simple, domestic act seemed to disarm them for a moment. They exchanged a look, likely thinking my compliance would make this easier. They sat, Samuel on the sofa, Jacob on the ottoman, the very picture of condescending patience. "Mom," Samuel began, placing his cup down with a decisive click. "Jake and I have talked it over, and we've made a decision. The offer on the house is too good to pass up. It's time." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke, my voice even and clear, devoid of the tremor I had feared. "There's no need to discuss it any further," I said, looking from one to the other, "because I have already made a decision about this house." They both leaned forward slightly, their expressions a mixture of surprise and annoyance at being interrupted. "It will not be sold," I continued, "and it will not be rented out." A flicker of confusion crossed Samuel's face. "What are you talking about, Mom? What other option is there?" I smiled, a genuine, liberating smile. "Sarah, dear, could you come here for a moment?" I called towards the kitchen, where Sarah had been quietly preparing a plate of cookies, trying to stay out of the way as always. She entered, wiping her hands on her apron, a look of gentle bewilderment on her face. I reached out and took her hand, pulling her to stand beside my armchair. Her hand was warm and steady in mine. I looked directly at my sons, their faces a canvas of dawning incomprehension. "This house," I announced, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "was built by Richard and me on a foundation of love. Its value is in the memories it holds, not the money it can fetch. And so, I have decided to give it to the only person in this family who understands and cherishes that." With my free hand, I reached into the large envelope I had placed beside my chair. I drew out a single, crisp sheet of paper, a certified copy of the executed deed of gift, and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock they had planned to dispose of. In the bold, clear type under the heading Grantee was the name. Sarah Ann Miller. Samuel's face went from tan to a blotchy, furious red. Jacob's jaw dropped, his eyes darting from the paper to his wife, then to me, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. The carefully constructed world of my two sons had just been demolished by a single piece of paper. The silence shattered. It was Samuel, of course, who erupted first. He shot to his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. "Are you out of your mind?" he bellowed, his voice echoing in the suddenly cavernous room. "You're senile. She manipulated you. I'll have this thrown out in court, so fast your head will spin." I remained seated, my hand still holding Sarah's. I met his furious gaze without flinching and calmly recited the words Arthur had prepared me for. "I am of perfectly sound mind, Samuel. It is my property, and this was my decision, made freely and without any coercion. If you have any objections, you are welcome to direct them to my lawyer, Mr. Arthur Hamilton. I'm sure you remember him." The mention of Arthur's name, a man known for his sharp mind and impeccable ethics, seemed to suck the air from his sails. Jacob, meanwhile, turned on his wife. His shock had curdled into a desperate, pleading betrayal. "Sarah, what is this? You have to give it back," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Tell her you don't want it. This is a family matter." For a moment, Sarah looked overwhelmed, caught in the crossfire. But then she looked down at me, at the unwavering trust in my eyes, and I saw a new strength solidify within her. She straightened her shoulders and turned to her husband, her voice quiet but unshakable. "No, Jacob," she said. "This was Diana's decision, and I respect it. Perhaps you should ask yourself why she felt she had to make it. That was the spark that ignited the final, spectacular implosion. The brothers' alliance, forged in greed, instantly dissolved. You see," Samuel roared, turning on Jacob, "this is what happens. You can't even control your own wife. You let this gold digger into our family, and now look." "My wife," Jacob fired back, his own face now flushed with anger and humiliation. "You're the one who pushed this, who brought developers into her house behind her back. You only care about the money." The argument devolved into a storm of bitter, long-held resentments, a torrent of accusations that had nothing and everything to do with the house. As they tore into each other, I stood up. Sarah, the new lady of the house, stood with me. "I believe," Sarah said, her voice cutting through their tirade with newfound authority, "it's time for you both to leave." They stopped, stunned into silence, and stared at her. Then at me. We were two women standing together, a united front they could not break. They had been dismissed, from the house and from our lives. Wordlessly, they stormed out, slamming the door behind them, leaving behind a beautiful, blessed silence. In the months that followed, a gentle peace settled over the house, filling the spaces once occupied by tension and greed. The angry ghosts of Sunday afternoons were gone. In their place, the house was filled with the sounds of life. My grandchildren's laughter now echoed in the hallways as they ran upstairs to the rooms that their fathers had once slept in. Sarah was true to her word and her heart. She sat with me one afternoon on the porch and made a solemn promise. "This is your home, Diana," she said, her sincerity shining in her eyes. "It will always be your home. You will live here for as long as you wish." Jacob, after a painful period of silence and a near collapse of his marriage, finally began a slow, arduous journey toward redemption. He started with a long, tearful apology, first to Sarah, then to me. He is trying, slowly, to rebuild the trust he shattered. It is a long road, but for the first time, he is walking it alone, without his brother's shadow to guide him. Samuel, on the other hand, has vanished completely from our lives, choosing his anger over his family. Today, I sit in my rocking chair on the front porch, a cup of warm tea in my hands. Sarah is in the garden, showing my granddaughter how to properly plant a new rose bush, a vibrant yellow one we picked out together. I watch them, a lump of pure joy forming in my throat. I didn't lose a home. I saved it. By giving it away, I reclaimed it. I secured for myself a future filled not with loneliness and resentment, but with love, dignity, and the quiet, unshakable peace of knowing my house and my life are finally in the right hands. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please consider following for more content. Remember, your feelings are valid and your boundaries matter. If you have a similar experience, feel free to share your own story in the comments below. You are not alone.